this series called Disruption the past several weeks. We kind of start off as a one Sunday thing, and then we went with it and just continued on that theme. So we'll jump into that in a second. Before we do that, though, let's say our mission statement together as a church. Tara mentioned it earlier. If you don't know it, it's on the screen or in your little bulletin. Journey Church, we are here to see the kingdom of God in Victoria as it is in heaven. Awesome. I believe it, and I believe it's happening all around us. We're seeing it, and we're going to continue to see it day in, day out. Awesome. Before we jump in, babe, you want to help me out over here? Get this thing, because I'm like ADD. It's going to drive me nuts. We'll just take care of business. We're family. It's okay. We can do things. Oh yeah, there we go. I'm sorry. It has a frequency that my dog ears can pick up, and so I'm just like imagine like a dog trying to pay attention while there's like a whistle in his ear. Anyway, I can't help it. My brother used to make fun of me because I have big ears. I think my head eventually somewhat grew into it, even though I have a very small head. True story. This is free of charge as well. My dad the other day asked me. It was a couple months back. He said, "Hey son, I wanted to buy this Astros hat. You know, I found this fitted hat. What size do you wear?" And I said, "Well, Father, I don't know, because my father never bought me a fitted hat growing up. I was never privileged to have such a hat." Really just twisted that knife in there, you know what I mean? And he was like, "Oh, well, did you?" I was like, "No, I didn't. It was too difficult to find one that would fit my small, precious head." And so that extra amount of effort was never put into finding one. And so he was like, "How do I?" So I have no idea, Father. And so anyway, he found the smallest one that they made, and it fit. So I was like, "Hey, now I have a fitted hat now." It took 34 years, but I finally grew into an adult-sized head. Maybe that's my problem. There's not enough space for anyway. So hey, let's talk about Jesus today. That's enough about me. So we're going to be reading a passage in John. But before we get there, just to kind of overview what we've been talking about. So we've been talking about this word disruption, this idea of disruption, and the basic definition of that is basically to prevent something from continuing on as usual. And so we've been looking at how God doesn't come and create chaos, but he does many times prevent things from continuing on as usual, as per the norm. Right? Like he takes some of these routines and these religions and these ideas that we've had, these ways of life that we've known, and he kind of turns them around. He gets in the middle, disrupts them, and changes the direction of those things. We were talking a little bit about this yesterday morning at our men's gathering, our men's Bible study we've been having on Saturday mornings. And we were talking kind of about that, like this leadership disruption, how Jesus showed his disciples how how this is how people lead, and oh yeah, when are we going to be able to kind of be those guys? And he's like, yeah, it's not going to be like that for you. You're going to serve, and that's how you'll lead. You're going to lay your life down, and that's how you're great in the kingdom of God. Because their idea, their concept was always like, God, we want to be great in your kingdom, thinking Jesus was going to come like any other conquering ruler and overthrow the government and put himself at the top, and then they wanted to be number 2, number 3, number 4, and they were always fighting over, well, who's going to be at your left and who's your right, who's number 2, who's number 3, who's number 4, and so Jesus was like, that's not the way it's going to be. So that was an example of this disruptive action and behavior of Jesus, of God, to come in and say, no, we're not going to do things the way they're normally done. We're going to do them differently because my kingdom is different than the kingdom that you know here on earth, right? So this is the way our life with God is. It's many times unlearning behaviors and learning new godly behaviors. It's unlearning ideas and concepts and learning God's way of thinking. It's his perspective. And we only do that by spending time in his presence and in his word, because it's his word that we renew our mind. We renew our mind by the washing of the word. That's what scripture says. And so we learn this. We are learning to think differently because we're seeing God's point of view and his perspective of things, right? So that's what this is about. So we talked about this blind man, right? And Jesus walked with his disciples, and he saw this blind man, and they saw him, and they were like, oh, Jesus, who sinned, him or his parents? And she's like, no, this isn't about a sin issue. This man's blind so that the power of God can be shown through him. And the guy's kind of sitting there listening to this conversation, and he can't see, right? So he's like, what are they talking? Okay, I'm right here, guys. They're talking about me right here in front of me. Like, I have ears. I can hear, okay? My ears work, my eyes don't, right? And so, he's, sitting there listening to them talk about him, and then Jesus is like, hey, sitting there talking, and then all of a sudden the guy hears and he's like, okay, and then next thing he does, he feels like this cold, just wetness on his face. He's like, okay, come on now, come on. You know what he's thinking. He had that option to be like, you know what, guys, forget this. I'm out of here, like punks. Or he could see what's going on. This is what Jesus did. He spat in the dirt and made mud. This is what the Bible says. He makes mud and smacks it on the dude's eyes. And then he tells him, all right, now go to this specific lake, the specific body of water, and go wash it off. And then again, the guy's like, really, dude? Really? How about I just wipe this off now, because this is gross. I kind of think I know what you did, but I'm not going to say it because I don't want to admit it, what just happened to me. So I'm just going to wipe this off and go about my day. But he went and he washed it off, and then he came back seeing, right? And so it kind of disrupted this whole idea because no one had ever been healed. They had been born blind. And then the Pharisees got all upset. There was this big ordeal, and they were asking the man, what happened? Who is this guy? And because he healed them on the Sabbath, and they've been threatening people, like, if you follow Jesus, you're going to be kicked out of the synagogue, out of the temple, basically outcasted and exiled from your people and your faith, and their whole world. They would be outsiders, and so people were nervous about it. But the guy was like, look, I don't know who the guy is. It sounds like you want to follow him. Why don't you go ask him? And because I think he was kind of sarcastic. He had one of those personalities. Because sometimes when you have something, you develop other things, right? So he couldn't see very well, so he could probably develop a really quick wit and sarcastic personality, was the way I like to think about it, because I read what he was saying. And anyway, but he tells the Pharisees, look, I don't know. All I can tell you is I was blind and now I can see. So you tell me this guy's not from God, right? And that's basically kind of how it went down. And then last week we looked at the story of the parable of the prodigal son. And we looked at really not so much the son and where he had strayed, but more of the heart of the father that would wait for his son that walked away. The heart of the father that would keep an eye and a watch out for him so that he could run and get to him before the cultural condemnation and judgment could get to him, right? This is the story of when he sees him from a far way off, he takes off running towards his son, because if he didn't get to him first, other people in the city would get to him and they would judge him for what he had done, going and wasting his inheritance, losing everything that he had to continue on his family name. And so the father runs to him because his heart was not one of judgment and condemnation, but it was one of restoration. And he wanted to restore that relationship. So he ran to him first. So this is this disruption. And so today I want to focus on a couple things, and that is the mercy and the grace of God. Now, when we think of mercy and grace, I think if we're not careful, we can think of we think of a passive attitude. Yeah. We think of someone having mercy, having grace, right? So what is mercy is basically saying you are wrong and you deserve punishment, but I'm going to choose not to give it to you even though you deserve it, right? That's mercy. That's I'm not going to give you this punishment that you rightly deserve, right? And you're not going to suffer the consequences. I'm going to allow them to skip over you. Grace is undeserved favor. So grace is you don't deserve to be in right standing, but I'm going to make you in right standing. You don't deserve to be in this place of righteousness or non-judgment, but I'm going to put you in that place. So they sound similar, but they're a little bit different, right? Because mercy still sees you're sinful, but we'll let it slide, so to speak. And grace is really saying, you're not even sinful. That's been taken care of. You didn't earn it. You didn't pay for it, but it's been paid for you, right? So that's kind of the difference is you've got a clean slate because I don't even see that sin because it's been paid for. Your debt's paid, right? Mercy is you can have another month to pay your debts, I guess, or but they're still your debts. And grace just says, no, debt's paid. You're good, man. Woo-hoo! I need some grace, Jesus, in my life. But if we're not careful, we will look at these things and we think because as maybe you're a parent and you're Yeah, I know that. Sometimes I'm just too tired to correct my kid. You know, you're like, hey, if you do that one more time, I'm going to get up and go over there. And they do it again. You're like, just please stop. Just please. Just close the door if you're going to do it. Because you're like, they call my bluff. I don't want to really get up, right? You're like, man. You know what I'm saying? Like, you kind of go over. And so we think of it as just this passive, like, we just let it slide. It's just soft. I can be walked over. But that's not it at all. In fact, mercy and grace are very aggressive stances to take. And when I think of the mercy and the grace of God, I think of it as a very aggressive step towards us. It's a very aggressive decision towards the resolution that he chooses to have. I think of it as this. When you're sitting at a card table and you're playing poker, and all of a sudden someone just says, you know what? I'm all in, baby. All in. Throw all the chips in. There's basically saying, like, everything I've got, that's an aggressive move. Whether you have a good hand or you're bluffing, it doesn't matter. But that stance, saying, I am all in on this. I am all in on this hand. Everything I have, I'm putting towards this. And you're going to have to put everything you have and hope it's enough. Right? That is an aggressive stance. And that's how I see God's grace towards us. It's an aggressive, I am all in on you. I am all in on restoring you. I am all in on being back in right standing. You being in right standing with me. And if the enemy wants to take you from me, he's going to have to go all in too. But the good news is he doesn't have enough. The good news is, like, he doesn't have nearly what I have to put all into this, okay? So this is grace. This is mercy. This is how God sees us. This is this disruption of culture and judgment. All right, so with that in mind, let's jump into the book of John, chapter 8. John is the last of the Gospels in the New Testament of your Bible. It's on page 370. No, I'm just kidding. It's probably a different one there. My dad used to do that. He'd be like, oh, open it. It's page 640 in my Bible. And I'm like, that doesn't help anyone, Dad. Like, he knew it. He's just a goofball. All right, y'all there? Stay there? Sweet. Everyone's like on their phones and their apps. Like, yeah, dude, it's 2 clicks. I'm there. I get it. It's on the screen. Oh, yeah, we're there. Awesome. So, John 8. Jesus returned to the Mount of Olives, but early the next morning, he was back again at the temple. A crowd soon gathered, and he sat down and taught them. And as he was speaking, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. They put her in front of the crowd. So let me just stop for a second. So Jesus is at the temple. He's teaching, people gathered around. It's kind of like what we're doing here and now. We're here on Sunday. We're in a place of worship. We're gathered. We're sitting. We're listening to the word and the teaching of Scripture. So this is kind of that gathering. And this is like our time, right? Like Sunday is kind of the day where we do this. It's kind of a cultural thing. And this was kind of like that time that Jesus came back to the temple. So this is what many people were doing, was there, being at the temple, spending that time in worship. So just imagine, here we are in the middle of this, and all of a sudden, the doors in the back just bust open, and some guys and some noise start coming down the aisle, and all of a sudden, they're bringing this woman, and they throw her down in front of me and all of you, and they're like, we caught this woman in the act of adultery. Now, a few things that are kind of interesting. Number one, these are religious teachers and Pharisees, teachers of the law, and this is the day and the time where people were at the temple teaching when they caught her in the act. So it's not like, hey, we heard and we found out. In the act, okay? I don't know how to get more clear with that without getting inappropriate. They caught her in the act of adultery, and they took her and brought her to the temple. What they were doing, I don't know. What they can find to catch her in the act. Maybe sometimes you got to think about where you're at. But that's a whole nother message and a whole nother story. But there they are. They find her. They catch her in the act. They bring her down. I would bet that she was probably not decently clothed, much at all. And I'm not trying to be weird about that. I'm just trying to put yourself, because here's the thing. I want us to see ourselves in multiple perspectives here in this passage. Because we are in different perspectives, at different points. We can find ourselves in different positions here. So the first one is the place of this woman. Now here's how I know or how I gather that she probably isn't like very decently dressed. They were not polite, I'm sure, when they caught her in the act and grabbed her and dragged her over here to the temple. Years and years ago, when I was just a young man, before Tara and I were married, I was here in Victoria living life, doing my thing, and I had a roommate. We had a little, it wasn't little, but we had like an apartment kind of thing together. And there was a morning where he had gotten up early to go do something. I worked like an afternoon to evening, kind of 2 to 11 shift, so I kind of like slept in a bit, you know. And so he had left that day. Some weird stuff had happened when he was leaving, which caused him to believe like maybe someone had come back into the apartment. It was a long story, but he had reason to believe this guy that had come by like was acting fishy and maybe he was trying to get back in because he had to come back. He forgot something and something was weird, right? So he leaves and he's like, man, that's weird. I don't know. So he called the police to say, I think someone like is broke into I think they're in my apartment. Well, he forgot I was at home sleeping in my room. And I'm a heavy sleeper, so I didn't even hear all these different interactions, things were going on. And so that morning, I woke up to 2 Victoria police officers with their guns pointed at my face, waking me up and saying, like, do you live here? Do you live here? And I'm like, oh Lord, what did I do? And I'm looking around, like, yep, I live here. You know, I'm like, oh, this is a dream. And they're like, you live here? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, okay, come on, we got to get up. And then one of them kind of like gets out to the hallway. They like clear the hallway and they're pulling me out. So like, you know, I like to sleep comfortably, as Judah calls it, sleep like a man. So I don't wear a whole lot of clothes. I do wear clothing, but basically just pretty much like my dantarans, you know what I'm saying? And so there I am laying in bed and I get out and they're like pulling me out and I'm looking at my closet. There's like some shorts and little t-shirts up on the floor, like in the closet, but I stop and I'm like, I want to go get my clothes, but these guys look serious and they're kind of like rushing and I'm just like, I'm going to get tased or something or shot. If I go reaching over here, I was just like, oh. And so like I think maybe in a second, maybe we'll just get out the hallway. No, they pulled me out the hallway, down the other side of the house and outside the front door of the house because they're trying to clear the house and stuff, and like there's a little complex of neighbors from upstairs are coming down. I'm just like, how's it going? Morning. you know, I'm like, oh my God. You know, very, very uncomfortable, very awkward. So I'm just saying like this is how I imagine, but even more aggressively. That they did this, and they came and they grabbed her. So she was, trust me, they did not give her time to get decent, is what I'm saying. So put yourself in this situation, or even Steveo's shoes, where you're like, oh my God, like for real, Lord. And so they pull her in, and they drag her, they bring her out, they throw her down in front of everyone. In verse 4, they say, teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. Now the law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say? In verse 6, they were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. Okay, so let's stop for a second. A lot of things going on. So they pull her out and throw her in front of the crowd, because there was law. And the law at that time did say someone caught in the act of adultery could be stoned. Actually, it probably said a woman caught in the act of adultery, because I don't know about you, but it kind of takes 2 to commit the act of adultery. So I don't know where the guy was, but they probably let him get dressed and, you know, go to the store, go to the market. Hey man, get out of here. This is going to get ugly. But that's a whole other story too. But they take the woman, the dude's, I don't know, maybe he's one of them, who knows. But anyway, they take the woman and they're like, the law says we can stone her and kill her, basically. Which, if you're not familiar with this biblical law, biblical time of law, basically they would pull her outside the city and take big rocks, big stones, and throw it at her until she died. This is how they would do this. And so this is what they were saying they could do because of what she did. And they're asking Jesus, what do you say? They weren't even upset about the fact that she broke the law. That wasn't the issue. Their aim was to catch Jesus on something. They wanted to have something to use against him. And they knew, obviously, they could not use something Jesus did because he technically never did anything they could even find fault in. Right? So they're like, man, this guy, we've checked, he's got no dirt. You know what I mean? They're like, there's nothing on him. We looked, we couldn't find it. So let's just try to trip him up. Let's catch him another way. Maybe we'll find someone else, and maybe he'll say the wrong thing, and then we'll use that to discredit him, and then, go all the way down that road. And so they were trying to do this, and Jesus stops and he begins to write in the dust with his finger. He stoops down to do this. Now, a couple things I want you to do. Number one, put yourself in this perspective. The first perspective we're looking at is that of this woman. She was clearly in the wrong. She was living and acting in the wrong. Now, I think they were able to catch her in the act because they probably knew for a while what was going on. It's in a culture where people know people, you see things, and, there's a lot of talk, and it's not like, they're close. They know. So they probably know, like, oh, that dude and that woman, we've been watching her going in and out. This is their time, the temple time. They go, They probably knew, like, what was going on, but they didn't do anything until they found a way that it could benefit them. And unfortunate for this woman, she almost lost her life because of that. And that's what sin does in our lives. Like, it lures you into a place of judgment. Ultimately, sin wants to destroy you. And the enemy wants to lure you with sin so that he can place you in a position to be judged. That's his goal. He wants to condemn you. He wants to find a way that you have to be punished and judged. And so it may seem like a good thing at the moment, at the time. It may seem like a harmless thing for you. But at the end of the day, that sin wants nothing but destruction for you. So maybe, like for this woman, maybe you're like her in some ways where you're like, there's some stuff in my life, and I know it's wrong. I know I got to get rid of it, but it doesn't seem that bad, and I don't think it's hurting anyone, and I actually kind of feel like it's enriching my life a little bit. I mean, let's be honest. Sin is pleasurable for a time. It's meant to be that way. But it will ultimately always lead to death and destruction and judgment. And this is what sin does. So this is what happens. Now, another thing that's going on is the people brought her there to the crowd because they understood the mob mentality. They understood that if we could get a crowd of people and we can start getting some people riled up about something, people will lose their consciousness, their conscience, and just begin to be a part of the mob. And we see this even today. We see people things get escalated and out of hand. There's a big crowd of people, and it gets kind of crazy, and it gets amped up, and all of a sudden, people are going and doing things that they wouldn't normally do. But because of this mob mentality, things go crazy. Like anytime there's a crazy natural disaster kind of thing happen in an area, what do we expect to see soon after? Looting. We expect to see people going and because a kid or a person who would never, in the middle of the day, walk up and throw something through a store window and run in and grab things and run out, now feels okay to do that in the midst of this crowd because they're placing all of their consciousness and their moral compass and character into the action of the mob in the crowd. So it becomes this thing that people can easily feed into. So momentum is building at this moment. Like there's a lot of guys who are saying like, oh yeah, I know her husband, he's my friend, and yeah, stoner. And people are like, yeah, they're yelling, and one guys like, yeah, stoner. What's going on? What are we stoning for? I don't know. She cheaters. Oh yeah, do it. They don't even know what's going on. It's building and building, and the guys are yelling. And Jesus stoops down in the dirt and begins to write in the dirt. In verse 7, they kept demanding an answer. So they kept demanding. So that goes to show me, like, they're asking, they're saying, what are we doing? What are we going to do? What should we do? Come on, tell us. She did this. And it's building. He gets down on the ground. He's writing in the dirt. And they continue to ask. They continue to rile the crowd up. But this is what Jesus does. He stops the momentum of death and judgment. He stops the momentum. Because all of a sudden, everything was coming forward like we want an answer now, and we need to do something about this. She needs to be judged for her sin. Judged for her sin. This is the voice that is coming forward. And Jesus stops. All the attention is on him. They're wanting him to answer. And instead of answering in the moment like they're wanting, he stops and he gets down and he begins to write in the dust. Now, there's like books and commentaries and all kinds of things out there about whole studies about what was Jesus writing. Some people say he was writing the sins of each one of those people and Pharisees. Maybe, I don't know. Some people were like, he was drawing that. He may have been drawing a picture. Like, I have no idea. Like he was playing tic-tac-toe. And they're like, what is this language? And he's like, oh, cat. You know? Oh, cat. You know, it's like, how does Jesus beat Jesus? I don't know. And so it's hard for me to beat myself. And anyway, so who knows what he was doing? We don't know. It really doesn't matter a whole lot. It just matters that like he was in control. Yeah. And he stopped the momentum. Yeah. He stopped the motion towards death. This woman was quickly escalating towards death. She was very, very close to losing her life because of her sin. I mean, it was imminent. And Jesus stops it with a simple act. I'm just going to sit down, crisscross applesauce, and just start writing, doodling. Maybe he was doing a little 3D cube thing, you know? Yeah. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. All of us who can't draw, but we grow drawing maybe, the little S thing. He's Jesus. He knew it was going to happen. He knew it was going to be a thing. You know what I mean? He's like, oh, those are 90s kids are dumb. Right? So, I don't know what he was drawing, but he was drawing some stuff in the dirt, and they're just like, what is with this dude? They're like, and they keep asking, keep demanding. So he stood up again, verse 7, and he said, all right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone. So here he shows, to me, he's showing mercy, because he's not necessarily saying this woman has not sinned and does not deserve this, and this is not the judgment that is. He's like, all right. You can stone her according to the law. But let's kick it off with, say, the one here who is absolutely sinless in his life. How about you throw out the first pitch? You know what I'm saying? Like that. So he's like, okay, fine. This is the law. She sinned. This is her judgment. All right, fine. But let the one who's without sin throw the first stone. And then, I love this. Then he stoops back down again and wrote in the dust. He's just like passing time, you know what I mean? He's over here writing stuff, and maybe he's writing God a letter. And he's just like writing stuff, and yeah. Please warm up some dinner. I'm coming home soon, Father. These people are just too much. And so he continues to just get down and write in the dust. And the accusers heard this, and they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. So a couple things to me are interesting. Number one, we forget throughout this whole time that woman's still there. Much like the blind man who's like sitting there like, hello, y'all talking about me still? Like, I can hear you. Right? She's still there, sitting. And what I love about this is Jesus could have done anything. He could have stopped and crossed his arms, I'm thinking. He could have ran his hands through his beard, and he could have done all kinds. He could have paced. Hang on. He could have stopped and be like, well, no, that's not it. Hang on. Man, this is tough. He could have gathered his guys together. We're going to huddle up, okay? We're going to huddle up. Psst. Like, he could have done all kinds of things, but he chose to get down on the ground where this woman most likely was. It was this sense of like, I'm here. Calm down. It's okay. I'm with you. Let's just sit for a while. Let them do their thing. It's all right. Let's just stay here. It's draw. See that? I don't know. Maybe he was drawing with her. I don't know. They don't mention her, but I think that's cool. I think Jesus may have done that. He may have been like, see, this is an S-T-E-P-H-E-N. I love him. He's awesome, right? So he could have been doing all kinds of things. He could have been doing who knows what, but he was there with her. He was there at the same level that she was at. When all this judgment, all this hatred, all this yelling, all this demanding for justice and death was surrounding her, he sat next to her. And they keep asking and asking. And I love how it says, after hearing this, obviously, they all started to think, the one who's without sin. And it mentions that they left one by one, starting with the oldest. Now, I think that there's a reason why I start with the oldest, right? Because I don't know about you guys, but when I was, say, in my teens, I had a different mindset and amount and level of maturity than I did maybe in my 20s, right? You know, when you're a kid, you kind of think you just know. And when you're in your 20s, you kind of feel like you've got the answers too, right? Like it's so simple. I mean, I pretty much did when I was in my 20s, but other people do too. You know what I mean? You're in your 20s, you're just kind of like, I get it. I got this. You know, I got a plan. I know what I'm going to do in my life. It's going to be awesome. It's going to look like this. I mean, you just kind of know, right? And so I think those young guys were like, no, I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. I'm my mom's favorite. I'm going to stone her. And then you start seeing this old guy. The old guy, number one, has lived a lot of life. So he's probably also had a lot of sin, just because more time, right? So, and then as you get older, you get a little bit more self-aware, right? You have a better self-awareness of who you are and where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. You've gained a little bit more humility. You've learned some things in life where you're like, you know, that wisdom comes from kind of those experiences where you're like, you know what, I was wrong about that. You know, maybe you're older and you've got kids who are grown and you look back and you're like, you know, maybe I didn't have to be that way, you know, or I missed a few things. I point these things out to my dad all the time. My dad, now that you're older, are you willing to accept and admit where you messed up and made mistakes? I'm kidding. I don't do that that much. But like you look back and you're like, you know, I could have done this better. I could have handled this job situation better. You know, I could have been a better boss or a better employee. You know, you get a little bit older, you just have some more wisdom, self-awareness, humility. It's what I've learned from watching older people and learning from them. I'm like, yeah, they get that, right? So the older guys are kind of like, yeah, we done lost. This game over, guys. I don't know if y'all realize this, but it's checkmate. We're okay. You know, like we're not going to get in the middle of this because they're also like, you know, then the younger guys are like, no, I'm good, man. And then something pops in their head like, oh, you forgot about last weekend. All right, you know what? I got some things to do, so I'm going to go. So they start dropping and their stones and their rocks, and they start walking off until there's nothing but that one young guy who's like, wait a minute, we're not going to do it? No? Okay, I don't want to be the only one. So, all right, so he leaves, and Jesus is left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. Then Jesus stood up again, and he said to the woman, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" "No, Lord," she said. And Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." Here he's showing grace. Because he's saying, hey, who's here to condemn you? And she's like, no one's here. And he's like, hey, I'm still here. Remember I said that the one who's without sin can throw the first stone? He's like, hey, I'm without sin. I'm still here. That's why I'm here. I think it was also a picture for her to see where he didn't say like, okay, well, we're going to leave you now because I done messed up. He's like, no, I'm still here with you. He stands up. So he's okay. Anybody else? And then he stops and he tells her, okay, well, I'm not condemning you either. He was showing her how aggressive his grace can be. That it can shut up an angry mob, an angry crowd that is thirsty for death and judgment. And what I love about this is what Jesus did this whole time. He was there with her because he put himself in her place until she was free. And this is what Jesus does for us. He puts himself in our place. He put himself on the cross. He did it until we were free from judgment, until we were free from condemnation. And even now in your life, wherever you are, Jesus will sit down with you and stay with you and walk with you until you are free from that bondage, until you are free from that sin, until you are free from that way of thinking, until you are free from those emotions, from that bitterness, from that anger, from that hurt. He will be there with you until you are free. And yeah, he'll tell you, just like he told her, okay, now go and sin no more. Because when you begin to enter back into this life of sin, what's going to happen? You're going to get lured right back into a place of judgment. And will Jesus be there for you and with you? You cry out to him, he will be there with you. But how many times do you want to stare down death? How many times do you want judgment hanging over your shoulders? I want to live free. And it's through the mercy and the grace of Jesus that we can be and live free from the bondage of sin, from the wages of sin, from the pain and the destruction of sin, because Jesus has paid the price already. Let's pray.